G'day everyone, I'm Alex Calder, Head of Sports Science with the Houston Dynamo Football Club. First off, thanks to Sportrail for inviting me again to present at this fantastic conference. An amazing panel, amazing variety of speakers on this conference. Today I'm going to talk about peak performance in professional soccer, which is obviously an incredibly broad topic. So hopefully I'm going to cover a variety of facets within professional football. And then preceding my presentation, Adam will go into a bit more detail and then some limitations and things using some overarching concepts that I've introduced just prior to his chat. So let's get on. So first off, I'm just going to have a brief table of contents of what I'm going to talk about today. So I am going to have a brief background on myself for those who don't know me. I think that's a vital piece because that kind of illustrates some of the concepts that I'll be discussing, and just by knowing a bit of my background. Then I'll talk about the structure of my presentation, how that will flow into Adam, so hopefully that makes a bit more sense. And then the overarching concepts that I'll discuss are who leads a model, which is a style of play within professional soccer, emotional intelligence and leadership, the power of influence, and then I'll try to provide some practical application with some examples along the way. Yeah, so just a really brief background. I promise this is a shorter slide. Brief background on myself. So obviously I'm the head of sports science here at Houston Dynamo. I do have a playing background, which helps speak the language with coaches and things like that. This is currently my 7th season in the MLS, where I've been at 2 clubs with 9 different head coaches, 6 of them permanent head coaches and 3 of them interim, which is a lot. Don't get me wrong, it's certainly a lot. And the reason I want to illustrate that is because the overarching concepts I'll discuss in this presentation certainly helps me keep afloat and deal with change management and different operational staffs and football staffs and things like that. So the other point here I've made is the club that I'm at currently has recently, in the past 2 years, undergone a big U-haul as a club. We've had a new ownership change, which then trickles down to new management, new positions, new director roles, which thus in turn created a new club model, new style of play, overarching philosophies within the club that came along with the new management. Yeah, so just briefly how we've designed this presentation, I think it should flow quite nice. But Adam and myself are obviously colleagues and put together this project here called Peak Performance for Soccer, which includes 43 different practitioners across 21 leagues across the world. So a lot of them are actually presenting at the Sportrail conference this go around as well, which is great. So a lot of the content that I'll briefly discuss, it all comes from here, and there's obviously more to be found. So at the end of this presentation, I'll provide a promo code which you can jump on and get 20% off. So what I'll talk about is just basic overall structure of professional football and what that includes, and then go into what that looks like as a practitioner. So what are the roles and responsibilities for a practitioner at this level, and how do you kind of modify some methodology and approaches as a practitioner to help drive peak performance within that environment and cohort, and then just overall application and strategies. And then Adam will go into a bit more of the detail of the day-to-day stuff, some different variety of microcycles of how to do football conditioning throughout weeks, and then some of the limitations, and then obviously he can try and rehash some of the stuff I was talking about and some of the decision-making processes within those limitations and variations of microcycles. So now we'll get into the bulk of the content. This is just the overarching themes and constraints and kind of thought processes that a practitioner would go through at this level in professional soccer. So I'll go through a variety of things and provide some practical examples and situations along the way. So first and foremost, it's absolutely vital to look at the overarching picture and the grand scheme of things of what the club and cohort look like. So the most important question to ask is who leads the model, who dictates and runs the style of play within your club. So to start with that, the model led, it's either club or organizational driven or coach driven. So some examples of this is we've seen the Red Bull, when Ralph Rangnick was there, drive this young player style high pressing model throughout the entirety of the organization. So that was with Leipzig, that was with Salzburg. Over here with the New York Red Bulls, they'll have the same style and same format and structure within the organization. So that's a really good example there of a club-driven model and style of play, and even approaches how they manage players. And then on the contrary to that is a coach-driven one. So clubs bringing in different coaching staffs where a head coach will come in with 5 or 6 guys and then they're driving their model. So maybe that's a bit more Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool sort of thing. So because pre-Jurgen they were playing a variety of different styles and obviously had different players throughout the early 2000s. So that's probably a nice example of that. So then that kind of trickles down to the practitioner in our roles as a fitness coach or sports scientist or whatever your role is, where you're doing a lot of the on-field work and managing load and things like that. Is that role appointed by the club or is that appointed by the coach? So both are pretty common nowadays. I feel as though the coach appointed practitioner role is certainly very popular in Latin America and Europe. We probably have a 50-50 bunch here, perhaps, maybe more so of club-appointed roles in the MLS. And speaking for myself, I'm a club-appointed role at the club. So we just had a like I mentioned, overall structure, a change where previously we were probably a bit more on the coach-driven model side, but now we've had a big shift to where the organisation from the first team down through the entirety of the academy have a set style of play and set structure and model within the club. So there's been a lot of change management and a lot of adaptability along the way for myself. But as my role as a club appointed role, it's important to work with a variety of staffs as well as the coach. So I think that's important to identify from the get-go. So now this is a very, very widely spoken about topic here, but I feel like this is absolutely integral for every practitioner to have a basic understanding of and know and kind of rehash this sort of information. But it's emotional intelligence in football, soccer, whatever you call it. So which is also known as EQ. So EQ, it's essentially understanding and having emotional intelligence of not only yourself but others around you and how your words and actions may portray and be received on the other end of people within your cohort. So that could be anyone from players to staff to management to anyone that's actually in your training facility. How you approach things and then how that may be received and taken back is having a good understanding and awareness of that. So for me, this is incredibly vital to identify, because I've had to go through this across obviously a handful of coaches now, and being adaptable in how I communicate, how I talk to players, and how I match and fit the style of what we're trying to do. So in saying that, I don't think philosophies as practitioners necessarily need to change. It's perhaps the approach and methods to get there and to get to that desired philosophy and desired outcome can be adaptable and can be a bit more transformational in that manner. So here's a nice quote that we have from our chapter 11, which is Coach and Staff Integration chapter, which is led by Jared Marsh in this one. So improving adaptability has also been regarded as a critical emotional intelligence competency. So what we mean by that is there's a certain element of adaptability which drives a lot of this emotional intelligence, especially in professional football. Being able to adapt to new staff, being able to adapt to different cohorts and different players, guys that come from South America, Europe, or Asia, or anyone with different cultures, and how you approach them and how maybe certain things may not be received and pushing the envelope and things like that. And we'll get to that in a bit more detail when Adam discusses perhaps the players that don't get minutes and how you approach them and being adaptable to their needs, and also understanding a bit more and having some empathy of where they're coming from when trying to push the envelope, especially on the performance side of things. So kind of the overarching concepts or outcomes, rather, if you will, I've kind of just summarized in 3 bullet points in relation to emotional intelligence and adaptability. Is the main goals of having a basic understanding of EQ is to build effective relationship with players. So like I mentioned, it's absolutely integral to have a professional yet effective relationship with those guys. As many as you can. You can't please the whole cohort, but to please as many as you can. And certain players will maybe veer to different staff members, especially within the performance department. But it's important to have a basic understanding of what their needs are and what they respond to be able to drive performance from your end. Second point is enhancing communication between all departments. So I've put specifically coaches, but this is certainly with everyone, especially in our roles where we're dealing with medical departments and things like that. Having a basic understanding of EQ is definitely trying to enhance the communication between those departments. So, for example, even scheduling meetings with the medical department, knowing they've been on their feet all day and things like that, to go up to them, for example, and say, hey, we're going to meet now, you're on the road and it's 11 p.m. or something and they've been up since 5 a.m. Maybe create some resentment if you try something like that, whereas if you have a bit of EQ and understanding, perhaps you come up to them with a solution, say, hey, look, I know it's late, we had a meeting planned, let's just do it in the morning, nothing's going to change overnight. So that's one example of that, of taking a step back and being adaptable and being having a bit of EQ about the approach. But the same goes for obviously all departments and all staff members. And then finally, interpreting and utilizing a variety of leadership strategies to get the desired outcome for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So next, just quickly, in our book, we've identified 4 kind of main and basic leadership strategies that were identified at the top flight in football, and that was transactional, transformational, authoritarian, and democratic. So for the most part, they're pretty self-explanatory, but transactional is obviously a transaction needs to be made, not necessarily tangible, but it could be something as receiving minutes or whatever like that. Transformational is being a bit more adaptable and it's follow-centered, whereas authoritarian is obviously just authority leadership, and democratic is a bit more laissez-faire, if you will. So, and then just this nice image I like, it's situational leadership, where you can kind of float between a variety of kind of directive behaviors and supportive behaviors. I think that's important when you're dealing with maybe rookies and veteran players, to slide along this curve of degrees of freedom, if you will, when it comes to certain things, and having involvement where it's a bit more democratic with veterans, but maybe a bit more authoritarian with the younger guys. So although I identified 4 basic leadership strategies or approaches, I'm just going to talk about one, which is transformational. I think this was the heavily identified one in professional football. It's follower-centered, so it's all about followers and leadership. It's future-orientated, so this is incredibly important, in the professional setting, because, as I mentioned, the job of a leadership individual or someone in a leadership position is to kind of bring a group together to follow the direction of the club and the future and the goal. So there's a goal in mind, that it's not just about the individual, but it's about a kind of holistic decision. So, and then it's important here to note that transformational leaders kind of thrive themselves on having a good relationship with the followers. So that is of high importance to those guys that preach transformational leadership. And then there is also research that kind of we identified also that it does show a positive effect on athlete satisfaction. So this seems to be the most kind of yielded upon leadership style in professional football, not just from practitioners, but coaches in general at the top flight. So And then there's just a nice table there if you want to have a look at that briefly or take a photo of that, screenshot this. But it's also found in our book is a variety of skill sets that transformational leaders kind of preach and work on, and traits that they have, which creativity, visionary, they're team orientated, like I alluded to. They teach, their attention to followers is of great detail. They're motivators, but they also, recognition's the important one there, because that's also interchangeable with good levels of EQ. So now just switching gears a little bit onto kind of the next overarching theme in professional soccer is the power of interest. So this is incredibly important that you kind of identify players, and you don't necessarily need to categorize them in this manner, but every practitioner will kind of understand, and looking at this, you'll be like, oh yes, I understand exactly who goes in here and who's in here. But basically what we have is a power and interest relationship, whether it's high power, high interest, all the way to low power, low interest. And you can see the players that would fit in those categories. So someone of high power and high interest is obviously leadership groups and guys that have been rewarded by minutes. So you're starting 11 guys and captains. Low power, high interest is young guys, squad players, and guys coming back with maybe not necessarily a great vocal in the locker room, but they have high interest in the club's desire and need to push forward. On the contrary to that, low power, low interest is guys on loan, long-term rehabbers who are not necessarily dialed in mentally and aware of everything, but maybe lost a little bit of interest just because of their own individual dilemmas or things that they have. And then high power, low interest, this is a very tough group to work with, because this can certainly persuade the culture of the club, especially if they have a great fellowship group. Disgruntled players and players that are out of contract or approaching the end of their contract. So that's a very fragile group, in my opinion. So once being able to identify kind of those groups within your cohort and have a good understanding of where guys fit and what their status is in the locker room, how they influence other players and even staff to that point. There's certainly actions that a practitioner needs to take, and this kind of goes back to being situational leader and having a good skill set in the transformational leadership realm. Is how can a practitioner adapt to those players and change their vocab and change their approaches, and even small things like body language and everything to drive performance, and then potentially help delegate that leadership model down towards the club through the high power, high interest individuals. So starting from that side, the high power, high interest, it's easy. It's easy for them, so they're just almost on autopilot. They're getting minutes. Their microcycles are automatic. The game day -2, -1 looks the same for these guys. They're playing every minute, and they're interested in the investment of the club. So just the only action there is to manage them closely and just make sure load management is pretty straightforward. Low power, high interest. So obviously the young guys and guys that are coming up is to keep them informed, so make them feel a part of the club, even though they have little power, is to tell them what's going on, show them some love and things like that. A high power, low interest is like I said, the troublesome group is very, very difficult, but it's the action there is it's easier said than done, but keep satisfied, and that's very hard. And that can potentially come back to that situational leadership curve where you're a bit more democratic with them and have a bit more involvement and give them a bit more degrees of freedom to help try to pick up a bit of interest, because if they have power in the locker room, that can kind of filtrate throughout the entirety of the locker room, especially with the younger guys. And then obviously low power, low interest, it's obviously tough. There are guys that are out and loaned or long-term injuries. So basic strategy there is just to monitor. They don't necessarily have a great impact on the club as of yet until they're starting to return. So that may or may not influence the culture too much. Okay, I know I belted through a lot of those slides pretty quick, and there's a lot of kind of a lot of themes and a lot of overarching concepts in professional soccer, and I just briefly touched on them. So just some basic takeaways is obviously first and foremost identifying the model. Where does it come from? Who pushes the style of play? Because that in turn goes to the next point is, what does that look like for you as a practitioner? How do you communicate and what sort of leadership strategies you're employing to increase productivity from all stakeholders, including the players, and essentially driving peak performance. Which is, lastly there is what I just touched on in the last slide, is identifying the groups, and then all the above points. Once you're identifying the groups, then everything else comes into play. What sort of strategies they need, what actions can be taken, and all those things put in place, and those concepts to kind of allude to and bring into play to help drive peak performance within the club. So apologies if some of those concepts that were just kind of skimmed over. It's a very short time to present, so hopefully Adam does me some justice here and goes into those a bit more in detail. But obviously more of this stuff can be found in our book, and I put a promo code there that's actually 30% off, so it's pretty nice. Otherwise, I'm open to any questions at those following links. So thanks to Sportrail for hosting me. Thanks for inviting us on again. It's fantastic. So I'll kick it over to Adam for some of the applications and microcycles that he'll be discussing.